Okay, the Bistro. First things, we have a number of pieces of business to take care of here. I think this is the last sort of contracted review I take in a long time. I've already turned a couple down from people because I am just not in the state and in the situation to be doing these comfortably. Whether or not I'm going to be doing some of my other games, I would guess that I'm going to keep trying, even if my mental state has not held up well. Overall in my life, I'm fine. It's just somehow gaming is becoming very hard solo for me right now. And someday I'll get settled someplace again where I know I'm home. Second one is, why don't we ignore the topic at hand, right? I just picked up a new pipe. And this is kind of interesting. I mean, it's a neat looking one. And it smokes okay, pretty well actually so far. The wooden, pipe itself is fine. But it's funny, it's a Chinese pipe. And I would think, well, it was cheap. Okay, great. I would think that overall quality would be low. The only thing that's low quality is the stem. The stem is very, very cheap. It's almost, it's like the quality of a better corn pipe stem. It's like I'm gonna bite through this someday very soon. And I don't know what to do because you can replace stems, but I've thrown out, or I've tended to keep pipes with really terrible stems rather than try to replace them. Because it's so hard to do. And you would think that's the cheapest thing to make anyway. It comes with all kind of things. It comes in a nice box, fine. It comes with a leather pouch, which I gave to my wife, useless to me. It comes with a little plastic pipe stand to hold it. Put a little bit of that effort into making the actual stem reasonable. Anyway, let's get to the game though. As I said, my mental state for soloing games has not been good, and that may have influenced things. However, this is not my kind of game. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad game. So I'm going to try to come up with the things that I didn't like about it and the things that I think other people like. First off, let's go to the components. I always like these kind of translucent cubes that Up and Away puts into their Game Crafter solutions. So even though there's only a few of them, they're kind of nifty. A whole bunch of dice, you need them all. And you're going to be rolling 15 dice at a time every turn. You have this little, this basically determines which restaurants people go to, what things they're seeking in a restaurant. And that is actually a really cool design feature. Not, appearance-wise it works fine. As a design feature, I really actually like it. It's this, you could use a deck of cards or something like that for the same kind of situation. But it gives you, I don't know how many, well, I guess 96 different options. But they don't all happen, but you have a certain amount of permutations, etc., with them that are determined by the dice. And it gives you a nice distribution of what things people are looking for. And it seems like a nice way to generate the results for the game. The only problem with it is it's difficult to, say, assess what's worth what in it. And I think either a mathematical analysis of it or a lot of experience with the game will tell you better which things you want to go for and which you don't. Board is functional enough. Represents restaurants up here. It's got a money chart, which I do not like because the money chart has the 10 digits only every 10 numbers, which means it's sometimes hard to find where you are, and I definitely had problems with that. It's also hard to assess what's going on these charts in terms of what's available, what's not. Some of it has to do with just the presentation of the tables themselves, but I think most of it just has to really do with the design and ideals of the idea behind the game. which is that you have certain things available and certain things that are not, and some of the things are available to some restaurants, but they won't help others. And just being able to assimilate all that information easily from the couple of locations on the board, as well as you have some things that you can get multiple copies of, some you cannot, and you mark the ones you cannot here. Just being able to mentally capture everything that you need to understand what could be helpful and what won't be helpful to you is such a pain in the ass in terms of a mental mechanical activity that for me it pretty much kills this as a game. Now, very obviously, trying to solo that, and I only did 4 players instead of my usual let's go for the max, is going to create even more difficult. By the way, the max is kind of interesting because there's going to be so there's always a maximum of 3 jobs generated here each time around, but there would be more people competing for them. And likewise, there's always a maximum, there's always a certain number of renovations that are just available. Whether you have them or not, that's sort of the maximum that's available. Now, you may not be able to get some of them. Like, let's say you have booths. You can't get booths again, so that one's just out. But the amount that are available to you on any given turn, or on any given choice to get those things, it doesn't change, even though the number of players changes. So the more players the game has, the tighter the competition for the resources available is. I don't think that really does much, except that you have a different experience depending on how many players you play with. What do we do? So yeah, probably the biggest pain in the ass for me is the presentation here. First of all, and what comes with the game itself, if you don't want to print out your own, is black and white copies. If you purchase the game, you're going to get a pile of black and white copies of this. But you can easily print out a color version if you see that as more advantageous. This was something that was dealing with this and assessing this was particularly difficult in a solo game, because I had to keep track of everybody's choices, what they're trying to do and everything. That's always a pain in the butt. But also what they already have written down on a sheet, yeah, that's not very easy to remember. And then add to that the difficulty of dealing with the camera work. You're supposed to write in these boxes, and instead I used counters, which helped a little bit, but caused its own problems because of a windstorm. Well, a little gust of wind. I live in essentially a wind tunnel at this point, and that's really going to affect my gaming situation. I can pull this table back further, but when there's not a breeze blowing over me, this place is probably going to become almost unlivable during the summer. We'll see. And if there is a breeze blowing over me, my game components are going to fly around a lot more than usual. And I left my paperweights, which are just really rocks, in Phoenix for now. Okay. The rule book. Were there any actual problems? Like, was there anything in it that was an actual ambiguity or contradiction? I don't think there actually was, but it's written in a style that makes it very difficult sometimes to assimilate what the designer actually means when he says things. Sometimes a couple of little clarification words are not given. Sometimes, no, there is one. There's one thing that I believe is completely wrong. It's not important to anybody but the designer, probably. But there's a reference that there can be more than one die in any one of these boxes. That's not the case as far as I can tell by my reading of the rules. But yeah, it wasn't absolutely clear how the payouts are generated until I went through it the first time and did it wrong, and then eventually figured out what was probably meant, and then figured out how I could possibly interpret the way the rules were written. And I can. It's just there's like a word missing in one of the rules that would have made it a lot easier to understand what's going on. And I am scatterbrained as usual, and maybe worse than usual, actually. So the actual flow of the play involves a lot of mental, mechanical type activities, So a lot of mechanical and then a lot of mental, mechanical type stuff as well. But also, you have to. That mental, mechanical is necessary to come up with what you actually want to do. So the first thing you do is you randomly, on each turn, the term turn seems to serve a double purpose here. But on each round, let's call it, you roll up to see, hey, what kind of stuff's available for me to buy? And now it says generate employees and equipment. I think these are all actually employees that go over here on the jobs board. The equipment, which is probably in the renovations or whatever, is just fixed and always kind of available. Then each player is going to pick an option. These are there's some aid on the player sheet to help you. Like if you want to change the price or the type of restaurant, you pick a 1. A 2 allows you to try to speed up the turn. If you don't have anything more you want to do at that point and you want it to score soon, that's what you take. A 3 allows you to take out loans. It's quite possible to run out of money in this, especially if you're doing poorly. Of course, if you're already doing poorly, you're going to have trouble catching up, and the loans just kind of cost you more. A 4 is ads. Ads are kind of an interesting thing. They're one of the factors that goes into here, but they're the only factor that when you buy it, it's only used once. Except there's some jobs that are only used once, or could only be used once, because somebody else could get the bid on the same thing that you had and take it away. And in a sense, those could actually be used no times, because there's assumed to be a certain level of competition to get that resource. Ads allow you to buy into one of the categories that could get you people. But, like I said, whatever you pay on ads goes away, and that could be that's kind of a disincentive. So at least my players largely stayed away from ads, except towards the end of the turn being a set of rounds, where they said, well, I can bump myself up a level in one of these things for this turn, and that's cool. 5 is bidding on the jobs board, and 6 is bidding on sort of the renovations and equipment. You have a 7th option, but the die only has 6 faces, which is you use one of your color cubes and you're opening up a new restaurant. And that is represented by the spaces up here. You pick one nobody's got, you pay the price for it, and actually they can go up for bid if multiple people are doing it, which they always will be on the first turn, first round of the first turn. And these help determine what prices and restaurant types you can have. They also tell you how many tables the restaurant has, which is going to affect how many customers you can service. Okay, that's all interesting. And after you select the options in numerical order of the dice, you're going to be then resolving them. And many of them end up being in little bidding wars. When you're looking at jobs or expansion items, you get involved in bids in them. When you're looking at property, you get involved in bids. The only people involved are the people who pick that piece, and they can each only do one of the thing they're trying to do. They can't just bid on several different items. Yeah, again, not sure about the realism of that. If you have lots of money, you should be able to make all kind of renovations and improvements at once, right? I don't know. But as a game, fine. Okay. And then after each round goes by, you roll a die, and you're going to move on this track, which limits the renovations that are available to you. And eventually you fall off that track, and that'll be the sign of the end of the turn, where you do the payouts. Payouts, like I said, you roll some dice, you generate them on here. You can look at the mechanical aspect of that in either the intro or the first play. I think I did it in both. And then you compare how well, if anybody kind of wins that first category. So whatever the first category is, that's the first determination. Anybody who's tied for or wins that gets to go down to the second category and see. And eventually you get to a point where only one person's standing, or you've run out of categories. If only one person's standing, you end up getting that die and putting it over on one of your tables. And if you're filled with tables, if your tables are all filled, you cannot claim any more dice, and you're out of the competition for the rest of the items, with one vague kind of possible exception, which I'm not sure whether or not you are, but you probably should still be in the competition, which is if you actually tie for something, for first place for something. After going through all the categories, you split the die. The die doesn't go on the table, on one of your tables, and instead you just get a cash payout based on the value of it. The fact that it doesn't go to your table is important because it's not going to affect your fame or your novelty. Novelty and fame are both tracked on here as things that can get you customers. The more people visit your place, the less novelty you have, and the more fame you have. And they're really just a single track that's being used on two spaces. So, and then your payouts are determined by the number of tables that you have filled, times the price of the goods at your restaurant, times this sort of weird mechanism over here, which is the price increase track, which could really vary the value of payouts throughout the game. As you go later in the game, they get higher and higher. They could eventually get ridiculously high. And if they get very, very high, what that means is, well, it affects your strategy in terms of whether or not you want to keep improving as the game continues on. Towards the end of the game, if that hasn't gotten very high, you may want to just hoard your money. You may do better by not trying to attract the most customers and make the most viable restaurant for the future. It may be just time to, sit back and cash in on what you've already invested in. So you've got to make that kind of decision making at it. Okay. So what I really don't like about it, there's a couple of things. One is it's too Euro-y. It's not something that I would play solitaire on my own, and it probably will never get cracked open again by me alone. The second, though, because there's no narrative, there's no real geographical thing to burn into my head and see the picture. There's no spatial relationship, nothing like that. It's all just this spreadsheet type situation. Now, I can enjoy a spreadsheet type game if that's all it is. I find this more difficult to deal with than just like filling out the forms in some other games where that's more or less all you do. And that would translate even in an opposed situation for me. Some people might be able to assimilate this very well and figure it out. I've always had trouble with Age of Renaissance for that very reason. This is a little harder to keep track of the things, although honestly there's less distraction, so maybe it evens out in the wash. But this is more complicated for just keeping track of what's going on in the paper. Outside of my tastes, though, what do you get out of this that's kind of cool? So you get this ability to kind of plan and target certain categories. Oh, one thing I didn't tell you about the payouts. So the payouts work in bands. So it's not like just for the most part. It's not just the number that you have, like over here, a 10 is not really much worse than an 11. Now there's a slight little exception to that, which is Anything that's on a purple space, it's the absolute number. But otherwise, you're just in a band of low, medium, or high. And so it's very easy to tie with people for any given category. So the idea is you want to be good in a lot of them, but not necessarily. Where you don't particularly want to be is at the top of one of the spans. Of course, as you're working your way up, you may end up towards the top of one of the spans, and it may end up paying off for you well. But generally, you want to break into one of the into the next column, upward rather than falling. Anyway, so you have a certain strategy and a certain trying to position yourself relative to the other players in terms of, well, I don't have the highest quality, but if I can tie as high on something else, my quality is better than those people. And you're looking at what other restaurants are capable of doing and how you'll relate to them and how that'll be distributed on here. What doesn't seem to work very well, and that makes sense when you think about it, is it's all across the board okay. Across the board okay is usually not going to be particularly able to win any of the competitions. And the more players you have, the worse that's going to be. So you want to specialize in something and then try to discriminate yourself from other people who are specializing in something. So that's kind of neat. And then the fact that this is really kind of random, and that you're playing with risk and stuff like that. You don't know whether or not the plan that you had is going to score you as well as you are. So that kind of risk management in combination with working against what other players are doing to make sure that you're not directly competing, that you're kind of hitting them from the side and maybe catching some stuff that they would otherwise get, but maybe being able to do that against a couple of players, it's better than just going head to head with someone and trying to do exactly what they do. You try to generate your own little niche and hope that it comes out well. I didn't find that compelling enough to overcome the difficulties, at least in papers for the printed stuff I need today. At least in the solo. Opposed, it would be cute. I would enjoy playing it. I wouldn't mind at all. It might be a little bit of a headache because I still have to deal with some of those problems. I still might end up picking a choice that, I overlooked the fact that, oh shit, I already have a pastry chef. Or, oh, I can't have a wine cellar. I'm too cheap a restaurant. But I would laugh it off and be okay with it. Or I'd curse it off and be okay with it. One or the other. It depends on my mood at the time and how much chocolate I'm being given. But yeah, for me, for the solo, it just does nothing. And that doesn't really help you because you're probably not looking at this game to play it solo. Can it be picked up and honestly, it's fairly easy to explain once you understand the rules from the rulebook, but the rulebook itself is a little difficult to cope with. So, if you're looking for something, it's definitely, there's a difference from anything else I've seen in terms of what it's giving you. I just don't know if that difference is cool enough to be something I'd want to play again and again. Not that I'm that kind of person, although I have to tell you, played one game of Rolling Stock, and my immediate impression, like a few other games sometimes that I've played, part of the problem maybe because I played opposed, but you've seen me play games here where my reaction was, I need to play this again. Of course, my reaction was also, I need to play this again solitaire so I can understand it, because I can't understand a game when I'm playing it opposed. It's a different experience, This one, do I understand? Yeah, I have a pretty good idea. I feel like I could walk into a game of this and make reasonably good choices, assuming that I can keep track of what what the state of the game is. Keeping track of what the state of the game is the hard part. And that's where the components kind of get in the way. I mean, I can't tell you that there's any real solution either. It's not like, oh, I would do this differently. I mean, I would put the tens digits on the number track. Okay, I would do that differently. But a lot of it is just, wow, I don't know how I could maintain this game being what it is and make it easier to present to someone who has, those kind of analytic failures. All right, let's end it up.